The book no one can read. In the collection of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, there is a handwritten book that no one on earth can read. It contains 448 pages of text, written in a script using more than 200 distinct symbols, a character set that does not match any known alphabet, writing system, or cipher from any culture in any period of history. The pages are filled with detailed illustrations, battles, religious ceremonies, figures that combine Christian crosses with Hindu symbols and Islamic crescents, and scenes whose meaning cannot be determined because the text that presumably explains them is completely impenetrable. The book first appeared in the library of a Hungarian noble family in the 19th century, with no documentation of where it came from, who made it, or what it says. Linguists, cryptographers, and historians have studied it for nearly 2 centuries. No one has cracked it. Based on documented research and archival records, this is the story of the Rohonc Codex, one of the most studied and least understood manuscripts in the world. In 1838, Count Gustav Batthyány donated his private library to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences in Budapest, a collection assembled by one of Hungary's most prominent aristocratic families over several generations. The donation was substantial, covering thousands of volumes across multiple subjects, and was received as a significant contribution to the Academy's resources. In the inventory of that donation, among the predictable items of a 19th century noble library, was a small handwritten book that immediately stood out as something different. The book is physically modest. Its pages measure approximately 12 by 10 centimeters, roughly the size of a modern paperback. The binding is wooden boards covered with leather, worn in a way consistent with considerable age and handling. The paper has been analyzed by multiple researchers and found to be consistent with production from the late medieval or early modern period, the 15th or 16th century, though the dating carries some uncertainty. The ink is carbon-based, brown with age, applied with a quill or similar instrument in strokes of varying thickness that suggest a practiced hand rather than someone learning as they wrote. What made the book immediately remarkable was its script. The text runs in lines across the pages from right to left, a directional convention associated with Semitic writing systems like Arabic and Hebrew, among others. But the individual characters bore no resemblance to any Semitic script or to any other writing system that the Academy's scholars could identify. There were too many distinct symbols for a simple alphabet. Over 200 different character forms have been catalogued in modern analysis, compared to the 26 of Latin script or the roughly 30 characters of most European alphabets. But the characters appeared with patterned frequency, suggesting a systematic writing system rather than random marks, which ruled out the possibility of decorative nonsense. The Academy turned to Hungary's most eminent scholars for an initial assessment. The verdict was uniform. The script was unknown. That assessment has not changed in the century and a half since. The fundamental challenge the Rohonc Codex presents to linguists is not merely that the script is unfamiliar. Unknown scripts are discovered periodically. Linear A at Minoan sites, the Indus Valley script at Harappan sites, the Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions at Egyptian mining settlements. What makes the Rohonc Codex exceptional is the combination of features it presents simultaneously that resist any coherent classification. A typical undeciphered script presents a finite set of characters appearing with frequencies that suggest either an alphabet, a syllabary, or a logographic system, and each type has characteristic statistical signatures. Alphabets tend to have 20 to 40 distinct symbols. Syllabaries have 50 to 100. Logographic systems have hundreds to thousands. The Rohonc Codex's 200-plus character count falls in an uncomfortable middle range that does not cleanly fit any of these categories, making it difficult to determine the basic structural type of the writing system before attempting to decipher specific meaning. Comparison with known historical scripts has been exhaustive. Researchers have systematically examined the Rohonc characters against runic scripts from Northern Europe, glagolitic script used in early Slavic religious texts, Old Hungarian script, various medieval cipher alphabets, Coptic, Armenian, Georgian, and multiple scripts from the Indian subcontinent. Some individual characters in the Rohonc Codex superficially resemble characters from some of these systems, but no systematic correspondence has been established. The resemblances are isolated and inconsistent, the kind of partial matches that occur by chance when comparing any two sufficiently large sets of graphic symbols. The right-to-left directionality is one of the Codex's more consistent features, observed across virtually all pages. This is a real constraint on the range of plausible origins. It narrows the cultural context toward writing traditions with that convention. But it does not point definitively to any specific script family, because right-to-left writing has appeared in multiple unrelated cultural contexts across history. The Rohonc Codex is not purely textual. Throughout its 448 pages, illustrations appear alongside and interspersed with the written content. Small drawings rendered in the same ink as the text, depicting scenes that researchers have catalogued and analysed in considerable detail, without reaching consensus on their meaning or cultural context. The religious imagery is the most discussed aspect of the illustrations. Individual pages show Christian crosses, sun symbols associated with Hindu solar iconography, and crescent forms connected to Islamic visual tradition, sometimes on the same page, sometimes in apparent juxtaposition with each other. This combination has led some researchers to propose that the Codex originated in a region of religious mixing, a frontier zone where multiple faiths coexisted and whose inhabitants might naturally have incorporated visual elements from more than one tradition. The historical Balkans and the Hungarian-Ottoman frontier of the 15th and 16th centuries would fit this description geographically and chronologically. Military scenes appear frequently. Figures on horseback, what appear to be siege operations, formations of soldiers with weapons identifiable as medieval in type. The weapons and equipment depicted are consistent with a European or Near Eastern context in the late medieval period, which provides some chronological grounding even when the script provides none. The figures are drawn with varying levels of skill and detail, suggesting either multiple artists contributing to the Codex or a single artist working more carefully on some pages than others. Female figures appear in several illustrations, in contexts that researchers have interpreted as religious, ceremonial, or allegorical, though the absence of readable text makes any interpretation provisional. The overall impression from the illustrations is of a document with substantial content across multiple domains: military, religious, possibly astronomical or calendrical, rather than a single subject text. But what that content actually says remains inaccessible. The most fundamental question about the Rohonc Codex, one that must be answered before any decipherment can proceed, is whether the script encodes a natural language or an artificial cipher. The distinction matters because natural languages and constructed ciphers have different statistical properties, and the analytical approach appropriate to each is fundamentally different. Frequency analysis, counting how often each character appears and comparing the distribution to known patterns, is the standard first step in any cryptographic investigation. A substitution cipher, where each letter of a natural language is systematically replaced by a different symbol, preserves the frequency distribution of the underlying language. If English is being encoded, The most common symbol in the ciphertext should correspond to E, the most common letter in English, regardless of what symbol was chosen to represent it. This makes substitution ciphers vulnerable to statistical attack, even without knowing the substitution key. The Rohonc Codex does not yield to this approach. The character frequency distribution does not match the expected pattern for any European language that has been tested. This means either the underlying language is not a European one, the cipher is more complex than simple substitution, or the text does not encode a natural language at all. Each possibility leads to a different analytical path, and researchers have pursued all three without reaching definitive results. Computer-assisted analysis, applied to the Codex in the 1990s and 2000s, using methods substantially more powerful than anything available to earlier researchers, has confirmed the statistical anomalies without explaining them. The text shows some characteristics of natural language. Certain character sequences appear more often than others, suggesting grammatical structure, but also shows properties inconsistent with any specific natural language tested. The result is a document that looks like it should be readable, but has resisted every attempt to find the key that would make it so. The question of the Rohonc Codex's authorship is inseparable from the question of its purpose, and both remain genuinely open. The scholarly literature has produced several distinct hypotheses, each with some supporting evidence and each with significant problems. The hoax hypothesis holds that the Codex is a deliberate fabrication, a document created to appear ancient and mysterious, either for amusement, financial gain, or to embarrass the scholarly establishment. The most commonly proposed candidate for hoax authorship is the Hungarian writer and antiquarian Samuel Literati Nemes, who was active in the early 19th century and had a documented history of forging historical documents. Nemes was known to have operated in the circles that eventually produced the Batthyány donation, and his technical capabilities would have been sufficient to produce the Codex's physical form. The problem with the hoax hypothesis is the physical evidence. Radiocarbon dating and analysis of the paper composition have placed the Codex's manufacture in the 15th or 16th century, before Literati Nemes was born. If the hoax hypothesis is correct, Nemes would have needed access to genuinely old blank paper on which to write his fabrication, which is possible but complicates the argument. The dating results have been questioned by some researchers on methodological grounds, keeping the hoax hypothesis alive but not confirmed. The lost language hypothesis proposes that the Codex is written in a genuine human language that simply has not been identified, perhaps an early form of Hungarian, a regional vernacular of the medieval Balkans, or a language of a small community that left no other written record. This hypothesis is difficult to disprove, but equally difficult to support without a breakthrough in decipherment. The lost language idea is consistent with the physical evidence and with the Codex's apparent systematic structure, but it provides no practical path to reading the text without additional material in the same language to work from. The history of attempts to decode the Rohonc Codex is itself a document of scholarly failure, not of individual incompetence, but of the genuine difficulty that the Codex presents to every analytical framework applied to it. Since its arrival at the Hungarian Academy in 1838, the Codex has been the subject of serious investigation by linguists, cryptographers, historians, and more recently, computer scientists, and none of them has produced a decipherment that the wider scholarly community has accepted. The 19th century attempts focused primarily on establishing whether the script belonged to any known writing tradition. The Academy's initial scholars compared it systematically against the scripts they knew: Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Arabic, Old Hungarian, and found no match. Hungarian linguist Antal Csúcsor, working in the 1840s and 1850s, proposed that the text might be an early form of Hungarian written in a variant of Old Hungarian script, but could not produce a consistent reading that generated meaningful Hungarian words. His attempt was noted, but not accepted. In the early 20th century, several researchers proposed Indic connections, that the script might be related to one of the lesser-known scripts of the Indian subcontinent, possibly brought to Central Europe through trade or religious contact. Specific comparisons were made to Old Kannada script and to certain Brahmi-derived scripts. The visual similarities identified were real, but insufficient to establish a systematic correspondence, and the proposed readings produced text that native speakers of the proposed languages did not recognize as meaningful. The digital era brought new tools, but similar results. Computational analysis confirmed the codex's statistical anomalies and identified structural patterns within the text. Certain character sequences that function like words, apparent sentence-level organization, without being able to map those patterns onto any known language. The patterns are real. What they mean remains unknown. Modern analytical techniques have added considerably to what is known about the Rohonc Codex as a physical object, even while the decipherment question remains open. The physical analysis has helped constrain the range of plausible origins and narrow the field of hypotheses, even if it has not produced a definitive answer. Radiocarbon dating of the paper has been conducted on small samples removed from blank margins of the Codex's pages. The results, published in peer-reviewed format, indicate manufacture dates consistent with the 15th or 16th century, placing the Codex's creation in the late medieval or early modern period. This dating is consistent with the style of the illustrations, which match European and Near Eastern artistic conventions of that period, and with the type of ink and binding materials used. It effectively rules out a modern forgery using new materials, though, as noted, it does not rule out a modern forgery using period materials. Multispectral imaging, photography using wavelengths beyond the visible spectrum, has been applied to pages where the ink has faded or where text and illustration appear to overlap, revealing details not visible to the naked eye. This technique has confirmed that the entire codex was produced in a consistent manner, with the text and illustrations appearing to have been executed in a single production process, rather than assembled from materials of different ages. The consistency argues against the codex being a composite document assembled from separate sources. Ink analysis using X-ray fluorescence and other non-destructive methods has characterized the elemental composition of the writing medium and confirmed its consistency with historical ink formulations from the proposed period of manufacture. The specific composition does not provide geographic origin information, but it confirms that the codex is not a product of 20th century forgery using modern materials. Any serious discussion of the Rohonc Codex eventually arrives at the Voynich manuscript, the other great undeciphered illustrated codex, held at Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book Library, which has attracted even more intensive scholarly and popular attention. The comparison is instructive, both for the similarities it reveals and for the important differences between the two documents. Both the Rohonc Codex and the Voynich manuscript are handwritten illustrated books from the late medieval or early modern period, written in scripts that have not been definitively decoded despite sustained expert attention. Both contain illustrations depicting subjects, plants, astronomical diagrams, and human figures in the Voynich case, military, religious, and ceremonial scenes in the Rohonc case that appear to relate to the text in ways that cannot be confirmed without a reading. Both have attracted serious linguistic and cryptographic analysis, as well as a substantial popular literature of amateur decipherment claims. The differences are equally significant. The Voynich manuscript has a much smaller character set, approximately 25 to 30 distinct characters, consistent with an alphabet or simple syllabary, and its text shows statistical properties that more closely resemble natural language than the Rohonc Codex does. The Voynich has been radiocarbon dated with higher confidence to the early 15th century, and its vellum pages have been analysed in considerable physical detail. The Rohonc Codex's larger character set and more ambiguous statistical properties make it in some ways a harder problem, even though it has received less attention in the English language scholarly and popular literature. Whether the two documents are connected, produced by the same person or community, or representing different examples of a practice of deliberate concealment using invented scripts, is a question that has been raised but not supported by specific evidence. The similarities may reflect common conditions producing similar outcomes rather than a specific connection. The Internet has transformed the sociology of unsolved mysteries, and the Rohonc Codex has benefited from this transformation in specific and documentable ways. High-resolution digital scans of all 448 pages are now freely available online, accessible to anyone with an internet connection and the inclination to look. The Hungarian Academy of Sciences made the full digitized codex available as part of its broader program of digitizing historical collections, and this availability has enabled a level of distributed analysis that would have been impossible in the pre-digital era. Online communities dedicated to the codex have emerged on multiple platforms, bringing together amateur enthusiasts, professional academics working outside their formal research time, and specialists from adjacent fields, computational linguists, cryptographers working in industry, historians of medieval manuscripts, who would not previously have had an easy way to contribute to a niche scholarly problem. These communities have produced some genuine analytical progress, more careful cataloguing of the character set, identification of structural patterns within the text, and systematic comparison with a wider range of historical scripts than any individual researcher could feasibly cover. The crowdsourcing approach has also produced a large volume of confident but incorrect decipherment claims, which is an inevitable feature of any widely accessible mystery. The combination of genuine uncertainty about the codex's nature and the Internet's capacity to amplify confident assertions has generated a substantial literature of proposed readings that have not survived scrutiny. Distinguishing credible analytical contributions from wishful pattern matching requires judgment and domain knowledge that not all participants in online discussion possess. What the distributed approach has not yet produced is a breakthrough decipherment. The core problem, that the script does not yield to any analytical framework yet applied, has not been solved by having more people look at it. But the quality and completeness of the analytical documentation has improved, and the codex's statistical properties are now better characterized than at any previous point in its research history. The Rohonc Codex sits in its archive in Budapest, physically intact, chemically stable, digitally scanned and globally accessible, and completely silent. Whatever it contains has been present in that building for nearly 2 centuries without communicating anything to the people who have studied it. That silence is uncomfortable in a way that goes beyond scholarly frustration. It represents a genuine limit on human knowledge, a document that exists but cannot be read, that has content but cannot communicate it. The range of things it might contain spans from the mundane to the historically significant. If it is a hoax, it contains nothing. It is a technically accomplished deception whose decoding would reveal only that it was designed to resist decoding. If it is a genuine text in an unidentified language, it might contain anything from personal accounts to religious doctrine to technical knowledge to political history. The range of things that people in the 15th and 16th centuries wrote about. If it encodes a known language in an invented script, it contains whatever a medieval or early modern person found important enough to conceal with that level of effort. The most historically valuable scenario is one in which the codex represents a language or a community not otherwise attested in the historical record. A voice from the past that has been silent not because no one spoke, but because no other evidence of their speech survived. The Bakar Valley of languages and cultures in the medieval Balkans and the Ottoman frontier was genuinely diverse, home to communities whose written records are sparse or absent from the standard historical account. A document from that context could contribute meaningfully to understanding a period and place that the surviving record represents inadequately. What the Codex teaches, whatever it ultimately contains, is a specific kind of intellectual humility. Human beings have been producing written records for 5,000 years, and most of what was written has been lost. What survives is a fraction, and even within that fraction, some things resist reading. The Rohonc Codex is a reminder that the historical record is not merely incomplete. It contains things we cannot yet access. Messages, addressed to no one in particular, that have been waiting for a reader who has not yet arrived.